Okay, so um, have you ever found yourself singing "I Heard the Bells on Christmas Day,"
Yeah.
around the Christmas tree with family and friends, and wondered, like, where did the song come from?
Yeah,
It's so familiar, but it's got a really kind of, I don't know, interesting backstory.
it really does. It's one of those carols that, like so many others, we kind of take for granted, during the holiday season.
Right, yeah.
But when you really dig into its origins,
Yeah.
it's surprisingly complex
Hmm.
and really kind of reveals a lot about the time period and the person who wrote it.
Yeah, so we're gonna do a deep dive into "I Heard the Bells" and really trace it back to its creator, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow.
Oh yeah, one of America's most famous poets. Longfellow. He's the guy who gave us like Paul Revere's Ride and the Song of Hiawatha.
Yeah.
But this particular work, I Heard the Bells, or as it was originally titled, Christmas Bells, this one really offers a unique window into Longfellow's world because it was born out of personal tragedy and national strife.
A lot of people don't know this, but this carol is actually deeply connected to the Civil War.
Yeah, absolutely. It was written right in the middle of the war in 1863.
And just to set the scene a little bit,
Yeah.
this is Christmas Day, 1863, and the nation is deeply divided, obviously, by the Civil War,
Right.
and Longfellow himself is already carrying a lot of personal grief.
Oh, yeah. He had already lost his wife Fanny just a few years prior in a really tragic accident.
And so imagine, it's Christmas Day. He's in his historic home, Craigie House, which was once George Washington's headquarters.
Oh.
It's now his home, and it's filled with these, cherished memories,
Right.
but also haunting reminders of loss.
Yeah, you can almost feel the weight of history in that house.
And it's against this backdrop that Longfellow receives news that just completely shatters his world.
His son Charlie had been severely wounded in the Battle of Mine Run.
Yeah. Charlie, a young man full of patriotism, had run away to join the Union Army.
Right.
And now Longfellow, the father, is grappling with this harsh reality of war.
And the agonizing fear for his son's life.
Yeah, so he gets this news, and he rushes to be by Charlie's side in Washington, D.C.
Which in those days would have been a journey fraught with worry and uncertainty.
Absolutely. And can you imagine the emotional turmoil?
Oh, absolutely. He's already lost his wife in this tragic accident, and now his son is bearing the physical and emotional scars of battle.
Right.
I mean, talk about a heavy burden to carry.
And it's within this context of personal and national turmoil that Longfellow sits down on Christmas Day and pens this poem, Christmas Bells.
Right, which later becomes known as the carol we sing today, I Heard the Bells on Christmas Day.
But here's where it gets really interesting. The poem that he wrote that day is much darker and more complex than the carol that we typically sing.
Yeah, there are verses in the original poem that are filled with raw emotion, doubt, despair, and the stark realities of war.
Right, and these verses were ultimately omitted from the popular carol version.
One of the most striking lines from these omitted verses is, "And in despair I bowed my head. There is no peace on earth, I said, for hate is strong and mocks the song of peace on earth, goodwill to men."
Wow. This is a far cry from the cheery sentiments we typically associate with "I Heard the Bells."
It is. It really is. It's like Longfellow is saying, how can we even talk about peace on earth when the world is literally at war, when brother is pitted against brother, when my own son bears the wounds of this conflict?
Yeah, he's wrestling with these huge questions, faith versus doubt, despair versus hope, and all against the backdrop of a nation tearing itself apart.
And you can almost feel that weight of history pressing down on him as he writes.
Absolutely. And there's another really powerful image in the poem he writes. From each black accursed mouth, the cannon thundered in the south, and with a sound the carols drowned of peace on earth, goodwill to men.
It's like the brutal reality of war is just intruding upon obliterating the supposed peace and joy of Christmas.
Right, it's such a stark juxtaposition.
It really highlights the tension at the heart of the poem.
So we have Longfellow, this grieving father, this renowned poet, pouring his heart out into this really powerful, emotionally charged poem.
Right.
But how does it transform into the carol that we know and love today?
Well, that's where the composer John Baptist Calkin comes in. In 1872, he sets Longfellow's words to music,
Okay.
but crucially, he chooses to omit those powerful war-themed verses.
Why do you think he made that choice?
It's hard to say for sure. Maybe he felt like the original poem was just too long or too complex for a simple carol.
Right.
Or maybe he wanted to create a more, universally appealing message, one that focused on hope and reconciliation rather than the pain and division of the war.
It does make you wonder if there was a conscious effort to soften the message, to
Hmm.
present a more sanitized version of history that, downplays the war's lasting impact.
Yeah, it's certainly a possibility, especially considering that the nation was still in the process of, healing and rebuilding after the war.
So the carol that we sing today is, in a sense, a curated version of Longfellow's original vision,
Yeah, you could say that.
one that kind of highlights the themes of hope and faith while downplaying the darker aspects of doubt, despair, and the realities of war.
But what's remarkable is that Longfellow's brother actually helped to create a special recording of the carol that includes those omitted verses.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
So we can actually experience Longfellow's original vision,
You can.
the full emotional arc of the poem as he intended it.
That's right. And if you're interested in hearing it, you can check out the podcast History That Doesn't Suck.
Oh, wow.
They have an episode called A Civil War Christmas that features a performance of the full poem.
That's incredible. We'll have to include a link to that in the show notes.
Yeah, definitely.
So with all this in mind, what can we really take away from this backstory? What does it tell us about Longfellow, about his carol, and this idea of finding hope amidst hardship?
Well, I think what strikes me is the honesty of Longfellow's struggle. He's not sugarcoating the pain, the despair that he's feeling, but even in those darkest moments, there's this glimmer of hope, this unwavering belief in a higher purpose, in the ultimate triumph of good over evil.
It's that powerful line from the final verse, the one that did make it into the carol. God is not dead, nor doth he sleep. The wrong shall fail, the right prevail, with peace on earth, goodwill to men.
Right.
It's like he's clinging to this idea of ultimate justice, even when the world around him feels like it's falling apart.
Absolutely. And that's what makes this carol so enduring, so resonant even today. It speaks to that universal human experience of grappling with these difficult emotions, searching for meaning in the face of suffering, and holding on to hope even when it feels fragile.
Now let's take a step back for a moment and delve a bit deeper into the historical context of the Civil War itself. What was the state of the nation in 1863, and how might that have influenced Longfellow's perspective?
Well, by 1863, the war was in its third year, and the nation was, as we said, deeply divided. The Battle of Gettysburg, which was a major turning point in the conflict, had taken place just a few months before Charlie Longfellow was wounded.
And this wasn't just some, distant battle. This was a conflict that tore families apart. Brother against brother, neighbor against neighbor. The tension, the fear, the uncertainty must have just permeated every aspect of life.
Absolutely. Newspapers were filled with casualty reports, and the constant threat of violence just loomed over everything.
And so this is the world that Longfellow was living in. This is the world that shaped his perspective as he penned Christmas bells on that fateful Christmas day.
Right.
It wasn't just a personal lament. It was a reflection of a nation grappling with its own wounds, its own divisions, its own struggle to find peace amidst the chaos.
And this brings us to another fascinating layer of the poem, its connection to Abraham Lincoln.
Oh, interesting. Tell me more.
Well, in one of the verses that was later omitted from the carol, Longfellow writes, "It was as if an earthquake rent the hearthstones of a continent."
Wow, that's powerful imagery. What's the connection to Lincoln?
Some scholars believe that Longfellow was alluding to Lincoln's famous 1861 inaugural address, where he spoke about the mystic cords of memory that bind the nation together, stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone.
So Longfellow is suggesting that these mystic chords, this sense of national unity, have been shattered by the war.
Exactly. He's
Yeah.
questioning whether the nation can ever truly be healed, whether those hearthstones can ever be rebuilt.
It's a sobering thought, especially considering that Lincoln himself would be assassinated just 2 years later.
It adds another layer of complexity to Longfellow's poem.
Right.
It's not just about personal grief or even the horrors of war. It's about the fragility of unity, the enduring scars of division, and the long, difficult road to reconciliation.
This has given me a whole new perspective on I Heard the Bells. It makes me think about the stories behind so many of the songs and traditions we take for granted, especially during the holidays.
And that's what makes these deep dives so rewarding. We peel back the layers, uncover the hidden histories, and gain a richer understanding of the world around us.
Speaking of uncovering hidden histories, let's talk more about Charlie Longfellow and his experience in the Civil War. What led him to enlist, and what was the Battle of Mine Run like for those who fought there?
Well, Charlie's decision to run away and enlist at the tender age of 19, it really speaks volumes about the patriotic fervor that gripped the nation,
Yeah.
especially among young men who were eager to prove their valor and serve their country.
It also highlights the anxieties of a father in wartime. Longfellow must have been incredibly worried knowing his son was in harm's way, especially after already enduring the loss of his wife.
Absolutely. And the Battle of Mine Run, where Charlie was injured, was a particularly brutal and confusing engagement. The History It Doesn't Suck podcast actually features an account from a Union soldier who was there.
Oh, wow.
And he described marching through these dense woods, relying on these inaccurate maps, and suddenly being ambushed by Confederate forces.
That sounds terrifying.
It was. And amidst all the chaos, Charlie, in his distinctive cavalry uniform with its gold braiding and buttons, was shot while he was trying to maneuver his horse to safety.
It's a stark reminder of the dangers that these soldiers faced, even those from privileged backgrounds like Charlie.
Right.
And his injuries were severe. The bullet miraculously missed vital organs, but it ripped through his back, leaving him with excruciating pain and a long road to recovery.
And think about Longfellow, watching his son struggle to heal, bearing the physical and emotional scars of war.
It makes those omitted verses even more poignant.
It does, doesn't it?
They're not just abstract reflections on war, they're a father's cry of anguish, a testament to the very personal cost of conflict.
Precisely. And they provide a really powerful counterpoint to the more optimistic tone of the carol version that we know today.
Speaking of the Longfellow house, it's interesting to think about the setting where all of this unfolded. You know, the Craigie House, this historic landmark with connections to George Washington, it becomes this poignant backdrop for both cherished memories and these haunting reminders of loss.
Yeah, imagine the atmosphere. A grand old mansion filled with family heirlooms and the echoes of happier times, now overshadowed by the weight of Fanny's death and Charlie's injury.
Right.
And those burn marks on the rug in the front hall, a constant reminder of the tragic accident that took Fanny's life.
It's almost as if the house itself becomes a character in this story, bearing silent witness to the joys and sorrows of the Longfellow family.
It really does.
And it's within those walls, surrounded by memories and grief, that Longfellow sits down on Christmas Day and writes Christmas Bells.
The weight of history, both personal and national, is palpable in that moment.
And as the church bells ring in the distance, their message of peace on earth clashes with the harsh reality of war and the pain in his own heart.
Creating this really profound tension, this struggle between doubt and hope.
And it's in that moment, in that historic house, that the Christmas Carol is born.
A carol that would go on to be sung by millions, many unaware of the deeper story, the Civil War connection, the raw emotion that fueled its creation.
It's a testament to the power of art, to transcend time and circumstance, to connect with us on a level that goes beyond the surface, even if we don't always fully grasp its origins.
Right.
I'm already looking at I Heard the Bells in a completely different light,
Me too.
and I bet our listeners are too. It's amazing what a little deep dive can reveal.
It is. It's like we're peeling back the layers of history and uncovering this hidden world of emotions, motivations, and complexities that enrich our understanding of this seemingly simple Christmas carol.
And speaking of peeling back layers, I think it's time we turn our attention to the poem itself.
Okay. That's good.
Let's break down those verses, particularly the ones that were omitted from the carol, and see what they reveal about Longfellow's state of mind in that pivotal moment.
Okay.
I'm particularly interested in those lines about despair and doubt. They seem so different from the optimistic message we associate with the carol.
They are. And they offer a really powerful glimpse into the inner turmoil that Longfellow was experiencing. But before we delve into those darker verses, let's start with the opening lines, the ones that did make it into the carol. I heard the bells on Christmas Day, their old familiar carols play, and wild and sweet the words repeat of peace on earth, goodwill to men.
It's interesting how the poem begins with this sense of joy, this traditional Christmas cheer. It's like he's trying to hold on to that familiar feeling, that sense of hope and goodwill, even as the world around him seems to be falling apart.
Exactly. And then the poem takes this darker turn as Longfellow really confronts the realities of war and his own personal struggles. He writes, "And in despair I bowed my head. There is no peace on earth, I said, for hate is strong, and mocks the song of peace on earth, goodwill to men."
It's such a stark contrast to those opening lines. The bells are still ringing, but their message feels hollow, almost mocking in the face of so much suffering.
It's like he's saying, how can we even talk about peace on earth when there's so much pain, so much division, so much violence tearing the world apart?
And then there's that powerful image of the cannons thundering in the south, drowning out the carols of peace and goodwill.
Yeah, it's a vivid reminder of the war's ever-present reality, its ability to shatter even the most sacred moments.
And it's not just the external conflict that's weighing on Longfellow. He's also carrying the burden of his wife's death and his anxieties for Charlie's well-being. He's grappling with multiple layers of grief and trauma.
And remember, he suffered burns himself trying to save Fanny from the fire that took her life.
Right.
Those scars, both physical and emotional, must have been a constant reminder of his loss. It's as if all of this pain, both personal and national, is converging in this poem, finding expression in these raw, honest words.
And yet, even in the midst of despair, there's this glimmer of hope. The final verse, the one that made it into the carol, offers a message of resilience and faith. Then peal the bells more loud and deep. God is not dead, nor doth he sleep. The wrong shall fail, the right prevail, with peace on earth, goodwill to men.
It's a powerful affirmation, a declaration of belief in a higher purpose, even when the world feels dark and chaotic. It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there's still something to hold on to, something to believe in.
But it's not a simple saccharine kind of hope. It's a hope that's been forged in the crucible of suffering. A hope that acknowledges the reality of pain and struggle, but chooses to believe in something beyond it.
And that's what makes this poem and ultimately the carol so enduring, so profoundly resonant even today. It speaks to that universal human longing for peace and goodwill, even in the face of adversity. It's a reminder that hope isn't the absence of darkness, it's the light that shines through it.
It's a beautifully crafted piece of writing, full of symbolism and emotion that speaks to the complexities of the human experience, the struggle between doubt and hope, and the enduring power of faith in the face of adversity.
And speaking symbolism, I think it's time we explore those layers a bit further.
Okay.
Longfellow uses some incredibly powerful imagery in this poem that adds depth and meaning to his words.
For example, the bells themselves are more than just musical instruments, aren't they?
Right, they represent something larger, something transcendent.
They're a symbol of hope, of faith, of something divine that persists even amidst human suffering.
Exactly. And then there's the contrast between the north and the south, symbolized by the cannons thundering in the south, drowning out the carols of the north.
It's a powerful visual representation of division, of the way that conflict can tear a nation apart. And it also reflects Longfellow's own internal conflict, his struggle to reconcile the ideals of peace and goodwill with the harsh realities of war.
The imagery of darkness and light is also central to the poem. It moves from that initial sense of joy inspired by the bells to a darker place of despair and doubt before ultimately ending on a note of hope and affirmation. It's a visual representation of the emotional journey the poem takes us on.
It's like those bells are cutting through the darkness, calling us back to a place of hope and possibility, reminding us that even in the darkest of times, there's always a chance for light to break through.
And that's what makes this poem and the carol it inspired so enduring. It speaks to that universal human experience of grappling with darkness and searching for light, for hope, for meaning. It's a reminder that even in the midst of suffering, there's always something to hold on to, something to believe in.
It's a message that resonates deeply, especially in times like these when the world often feels chaotic and uncertain.
Absolutely. Longfellow's experience, though rooted in a specific historical context, speaks to something timeless, something essential about the human condition.
It's a reminder that we're not alone in our struggles, that others have faced similar challenges and found ways to persevere, to find hope, to move forward.
And it's a call to action, an encouragement to seek out those glimmers of hope in our own lives, to hold on to faith, and to work toward a better future even when it feels impossible.
Speaking of finding hope in challenging times, I can't help but think about the parallels between Longfellow's experience and what so many people are going through today.
Yeah, in terms of facing personal and global challenges that can feel overwhelming at times.
Exactly. We're living in a time of great uncertainty and upheaval. There's the ongoing pandemic, the climate crisis, political polarization, social injustice. It's easy to feel overwhelmed and despairing, to wonder if things will ever get better.
It's true, and yet, just like Longfellow found hope in the midst of the Civil War, we too can find ways to navigate these difficult times, to draw strength from within and from each other.
His poem reminds us that even when the world feels like it's falling apart, there's still beauty to be found, connections to be made, and hope to be nurtured.
It's about finding those glimmers of light in the darkness, those moments of grace that remind us of our shared humanity and our capacity for resilience.
Like the sound of bells ringing, the laughter of loved ones, or the simple act of singing a song together. Those small acts of beauty and connection can be incredibly powerful, especially when we're feeling lost or overwhelmed.
They remind us that we're not alone, that there's still good in the world, and that even in the darkest of times, hope can prevail.
It's a message that's both comforting and inspiring. And it makes you appreciate the lasting legacy of Longfellow's poem, how it's continued to offer solace and inspiration to people facing their own challenges generation after generation.
It's a testament to the enduring power of art to speak to the human condition, to connect us across time and circumstance, and to remind us that we're all in this together.
And that's a message worth holding on to, especially as we navigate the complexities and uncertainties of our own time.
So, welcome back to our deep dive into the story behind I Heard the Bells.
Yeah.
We've been exploring the historical context of its creation, the personal tragedies that influenced Longfellow, and of course, those powerful omitted verses that add a whole new dimension to the carol.
Right. It's amazing how much depth there is to uncover beneath the surface of a song we've all sung countless times.
It is.
And speaking of uncovering hidden layers,
Mhm.
I'm really intrigued by this idea that Longfellow's brother helped to create a recording that includes those missing verses.
Yeah, that's a fascinating little piece of the puzzle, and it gives us a chance to hear the poem as Longfellow originally intended it, with all its raw emotion and complexity.
I can't wait to listen to that recording. It's on the History That Doesn't Suck podcast, right?
That's right. Their episode, A Civil War Christmas, features a performance of the full poem, and it's a powerful way to connect with the depth of Longfellow's words and the historical context that shaped them.
I'm definitely adding that to my listening queue. So we've talked about how those omitted verses paint a darker, more nuanced picture of Longfellow's emotional state. What do you think was the impact of leaving them out when the poem was adapted into a carol?
Well, it's a complex question, and there's no easy answer. On the one hand, omitting those verses, might have made the song more accessible to a wider audience, focusing on the more universally appealing themes of hope and faith.
Especially during a time of national healing after the Civil War.
Right.
A more upbeat, less emotionally charged carol might have resonated more strongly with people who were eager to move forward and rebuild.
Exactly. But on the other hand, leaving out those verses also obscures a significant part of Longfellow's message, his honest portrayal of doubt, despair, and the very real struggles of finding hope amidst darkness.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if, in trying to create a more universally appealing message, something was lost, some of the raw authenticity of Longfellow's experience.
It's certainly a possibility, and it highlights the power of art to both reflect and shape our understanding of history. Sometimes, in trying to create a more palatable narrative, we risk simplifying complex truths and overlooking uncomfortable realities.
It's a reminder of the importance of seeking out multiple perspectives, of digging deeper into those stories behind the stories, and questioning those narratives that might be presented as straightforward or definitive.
I completely agree. And that brings us back to the power of Longfellow's original poem, the one that includes those omitted verses. It doesn't shy away from the darkness. It embraces, it grapples with it, and ultimately finds a way to transcend it.
It's that willingness to confront those difficult emotions, to acknowledge the complexities of life that makes the poem so powerful, so resonant. It reminds us that we don't have to pretend everything is okay, that it's okay to struggle, to doubt, to despair.
Exactly. And it's in those moments of honesty, of vulnerability, that we often find the greatest strength, the deepest connections, and the most profound hope.
It's like Longfellow is saying, I'm hurting, I'm doubting, I'm struggling. But I'm still here, I'm still fighting. I'm still choosing to believe in the possibility of a better future.
And that's a powerful message, one that resonates across time and circumstance. It's a message that speaks to our shared humanity, our capacity for resilience, and our enduring hope for a world filled with peace and goodwill.
It's also a message that's particularly relevant today as we navigate our own challenges and uncertainties. The world can often feel like a dark and chaotic place, but I Heard the Bells reminds us that there's always a reason to keep believing, to keep hoping, to keep working toward a brighter tomorrow.
Beautifully put. And that brings us to another fascinating aspect of this carol, its enduring legacy. How did this poem, born out of such personal and national turmoil, become such a beloved holiday tradition?
It's amazing to think about how art can transcend its origins, taking on new meanings and resonating with different audiences across generations.
I Heard the Bells on Christmas Day is a perfect example of this. It's become so deeply ingrained in our holiday celebrations, a song we hear everywhere in churches, on the radio, and shopping malls. It's become synonymous with Christmas cheer.
But as we've uncovered, there's so much more to it than meets the ear. There's a depth of emotion, a complexity of thought, a historical context that adds layers of meaning to those familiar lyrics.
Knowing the backstory, understanding the context of the Civil War and Longfellow's personal struggles, it allows us to hear the carol with fresh ears, to appreciate its nuances, and to connect with its message on a deeper level.
It's like uncovering a hidden world behind the facade of a familiar song, revealing its complexities and enriching our understanding of its true power.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the reasons why this carol has stood the test of time. It speaks to something universal, something that transcends its specific historical context and resonates with people across generations.
Right. We might not be thinking about the Civil War or Longfellow's personal tragedies when we hear those bells ringing. But the underlying themes of struggle and hope, of doubt and faith, still hold power.
Those are timeless themes that we all grapple with at some point in our lives. And I Heard the Bells offers a way to process those emotions, to find solace in shared experience, and to ultimately reaffirm our belief in the possibility of a better world.
It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there's always a glimmer of hope, a reason to keep believing, a reason to keep striving for peace and goodwill.
Beautifully put. And that brings us to another fascinating question. What is it about this particular carol, aside from its historical context, that makes it so enduring? Why has it stood the test of time when so many other songs have faded into obscurity?
It's a great question. I think part of it is the simplicity of the melody. It's
Yeah.
catchy, easy to sing along to, and it sticks in your head.
You're right, it's a melody that's both memorable and emotionally evocative. And then there's the power of repetition. The phrase, peace on earth, goodwill to men, appears in almost every verse, reinforcing its message and driving it home.
It's like a mantra, a message that's hammered home through music and repetition. A message that's particularly potent during the holiday season when people are often searching for meaning and connection.
Especially in a world that can often feel chaotic and divided. This idea of peace on earth takes on an almost utopian quality, something to strive for, even if it feels unattainable at times.
And then there's the emotional arc of the song, the way it moves from that initial sense of joy to a darker place of doubt and despair before ultimately ending on a note of hope and affirmation.
It's like a journey, a reflection of the human experience itself. We all go through periods of darkness and difficulty, but there's always the possibility of finding light again.
It's almost like a musical version of the hero's journey. We face obstacles, we experience setbacks, but we ultimately emerge stronger and more resilient.
That's a great analogy. And it's a reminder that hope isn't something that's simply given to us. It's something we have to fight for, something we have to cultivate within ourselves, even when the world around us feels like it's falling apart.
And that's a message that's just as relevant today as it was in Longfellow's time, maybe even more so.
Mm.
We're living in a world that's facing all sorts of challenges: climate change, political polarization, social unrest. It's easy to feel overwhelmed, to give in to despair.
But I Heard the Bells reminds us that even in the darkest of times, there's always a glimmer of hope.
And that hope can be found in the simplest of things, in the sound of bells ringing, in the gathering of loved ones, in the act of singing a song together.
It's those shared experiences, those moments of connection and affirmation that help us to navigate the darkness and find our way back to the light.
It's a reminder that even though we may face individual challenges, we're all connected. We're all part of something larger than ourselves, and we all have the capacity for hope and resilience.
Beautifully put. And it makes you think about the legacy of this carol, how it's continued to inspire and uplift people for generations, offering a message of comfort and solidarity in times of trouble.
It's a testament to the enduring power of art, how it can speak to us across time and circumstance, offering solace, hope, and a sense of shared humanity.
And it's a reminder that even the simplest songs can hold profound truths waiting to be discovered and embraced.
Speaking of discovering truths, I think it's time we circle back to that special recording of Christmas bells that includes the omitted verses.
You mean the one featured on the History That Doesn't Suck podcast?
Exactly. I'm so curious to hear Longfellow's poem in its entirety, with all its raw emotion and historical context.
Me too. It's like hearing the carol for the first time, discovering a hidden dimension that's been obscured for all these years. And it makes you wonder, why were those verses left out in the first place? Was it simply a matter of length, or was there something more deliberate at play?
That's a great question, and it's something that historians and music scholars have debated for years. Some argue that John Baptist Calkin, the composer who set Longfellow's words to music, simply wanted to create a more concise and universally appealing carol.
And that makes sense. The omitted verses are quite dark and specific to Longfellow's experience of the Civil War. They might have been seen as too heavy or too controversial for a widely popular Christmas carol.
But others suggest that there was a more conscious effort to downplay the war's legacy, to create a more sanitized version of history that focused on hope and reconciliation, rather than the lingering pain and division.
It was a time of national healing, and perhaps those in power felt that a more upbeat carol would better serve that purpose. It's fascinating to consider how art can be used to shape our understanding of history, sometimes in subtle ways.
It's a reminder of the importance of digging deeper, of seeking out those hidden voices and perspectives that have been silenced or marginalized, because sometimes it's in those forgotten corners that we find the most profound truths.
Absolutely, and in the case of I Heard the Bells, Hearing those omitted verses adds a whole new layer of meaning and complexity to the carol. It's like we're getting a glimpse into Longfellow's heart, feeling the weight of his grief and despair, but also his unwavering belief in the possibility of a better future.
It's a message that's worth hearing, even if it's not always easy or comfortable.
Mm.
Because sometimes the most powerful truths are the ones that challenge us to confront the darkness and find the light within ourselves.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time we shift our attention to the impact I Heard the Bells has had on American culture.
Yes, let's explore how this carol, born out of such personal and national turmoil, has become such a beloved holiday tradition.
Welcome back to our deep dive into I Heard the Bells.
We've been tracing the journey of this carol, from its origins in Longfellow's personal grief and the turmoil of the Civil War, all the way to, its evolution into this beloved holiday tradition.
Yeah, it's really incredible how a song written over 150 years ago can still resonate so deeply with us today.
It really speaks to the power of art to transcend time and connect with something universal in the human experience.
Right, and I Heard the Bells captures that, both the darkness and the light, the struggle and the hope that we all grapple with in our own lives.
Speaking of hope, I think it's time we revisit that final enduring line of the carol. The wrong shall fail, the right prevail with peace on earth, goodwill to men. What are your thoughts on that line? Was it just, blind optimism on Longfellow's part or something more profound?
That's a great question, and it's one that's kind of lingered with me, throughout this whole deep dive. It's a line that's both hopeful and challenging. It offers this vision of a better world while acknowledging the realities of suffering and injustice.
Yeah, it's not a passive hope, is it? It's an active call to believe in something better, to work towards a more just and peaceful world, even when faced with obstacles and setbacks.
Absolutely. It's like Longfellow is saying, yes, the world is full of darkness and pain, but we can't give up on the possibility of good overcoming evil. We have to keep striving for it, keep believing in it, even when it feels impossible.
It's a call to action, an invitation to participate in the creation of a better world,
Yeah.
to be agents of peace and goodwill, even in the face of adversity.
And that message couldn't be more relevant today as we face our own set of global and personal challenges.
Yeah, it's easy to feel overwhelmed by all the negativity in the world, to succumb to cynicism and despair. But I Heard the Bells. It reminds us that hope is not a naive delusion. It's a powerful force for change.
It's the fuel that drives our actions, our creativity, our compassion, our determination to make the world a better place, one small act of kindness at a time.
One courageous stand against injustice, one voice raised in support of peace.
Exactly.
And it reminds us that we're not alone in this struggle.
Right. There are countless others out there who are also striving for a more just and compassionate world.
And that collective effort, that shared belief in the possibility of good, that's what will ultimately make a difference.
Longfellow's message, it really transcends, the boundaries of time and circumstance. It speaks to something fundamental about the human spirit, our capacity for hope, our resilience in the face of adversity, and our interconnectedness as human beings.
This deep dive has been an incredible journey. We've uncovered the layers of history and emotion and symbolism behind a carol we thought we knew. It's given me a newfound appreciation for I Heard the Bells, not just as this beautiful song, but as a powerful testament to the human spirit's capacity for hope and resilience.
It really has been a privilege to explore this with you. And, for our listeners out there, if you want to experience the full emotional impact of Longfellow's original poem, I highly recommend checking out the History That Doesn't Suck podcast. Their episode is titled A Civil War Christmas. It's a powerful way to connect with the heart of this timeless carol.
It's been an amazing deep dive.
It has. And until next time, keep seeking out those hidden depths, keep exploring those untold stories and keep embracing the power of art to illuminate our world and inspire us to be, better, more compassionate human beings.